Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Random Redshirt podcast. I am one of the hosts, Zach, and the other host, as always, is Chris. What's up, buddy?
Hello, Zach, my great friend. Hello, everyone, all of our listeners around the world. Thank you so much for joining us. It's wonderful to be here, as always, and hopefully everyone has been enjoying our latest episodes. Hopefully everyone has been well and been safe. It has been we had a huge windstorm up here. Like,
Oh, wind, huh?
yeah, wind was a lot, but otherwise,
Yeah. We had more
yeah.
snow, unfortunately.
You have more snow where you are
Yeah.
than where I am right now.
Isn't that sad?
Yeah, that's supposed to be opposite.
You would think so, right? I mean, Alaska's kind of known for their winters,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, I mean, the whole country, the whole United States has really gotten hit with a cold snap. I mean, a lot of snow, a lot of uh, cold wind, places I think we're getting snow that don't normally get it.
Right. Lafayette, Louisiana got snow.
Oh my gosh, that's wild.
That is crazy.
That is wild.
I think there were like alligators like in the frozen ponds going into hibernation.
Really? Dang. That seems strange to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
I think people living there probably thought that was strange too. But yeah, there were a lot of places that were affected by the cold and some really, really brutal temperatures.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So tis the season.
Yeah. Plenty of unusual weather like occurring now.
Oh, yeah. It's that time of year, I guess. But yeah, so everybody, welcome to the Random Redshirt podcast. As always, we are a couple of nerdy guys who like to talk about all things nerdy, Star Trek to Star Wars, everything in between. If this is your first time listening or watching, we very much appreciate it. Be sure to go to Facebook and Instagram. Check us out there. You can find our YouTube channel if you're listening to the audio only version of this episode. And if this is not your first time, welcome back. We are continuing our Spotlight series in which we are talking about the final, what we call Legacy Star Trek pilot, and that is Star Trek Enterprise's Broken Bow. Uh, I know we talked about this earlier, Chris, but I'm very excited to talk about this episode. Um, it's an awesome pilot, and I'm really looking forward to diving into this with you.
It was really, really good. So this kind of as a pilot, it kind of has definitely has a different feel, a little bit of a different look. Um, I mean, the last like we talked about like Voyager as a pilot, right? That was the last pilot that came before um Enterprise. And there's a bit of time. I think Voyager was mid 90s and then Enterprise was 2001, I believe.
2000, yeah,
Yeah. So it
yep.
was a bit of time there, but I really like uh, the look and feel of this pilot. It definitely sets itself like apart from the others from the other Star Treks, of course, right? Just the entire premise, but definitely sets itself apart from TNG, Voyager, and Deep Space Nine.
It really does. And we are getting into now a period of time in television where CGI and special effects have become very significant, right? I mean, CGI special effects are replacing a lot of practical effects at this point. Um, it's a big deal, and this is a vastly. But we've said this before from DS9 and Voyager, how vastly different they were when they came out, right? And now we get another Star Trek series that is vastly different, vastly different than what we were used to, right? Instead of continuing on the trend of moving forward in the timeline, now they decide to go back approximately about 100-ish years, little over 100 years before Kirk and Spock. And I remember watching the documentary called The Captains that Shatner did. I don't know if you've seen that or not, Chris. It's
Not yet, no.
fantastic. It is a fantastic documentary. I believe you can watch it free with ads on YouTube, I think. Um, but it is a fantastic documentary. And Shatner basically went around. This is before, obviously, the new Trek series. So he went around and he interviewed, as you might imagine, all of the captains of the different series. And at the time he does it, I believe Enterprise either was still on or one was not off the air that long, but it was still a relatively new series.
Mm-hmm.
And he interviewed Scott Bakula, of course. And Scott Bakula really wasn't, I don't think, that interested in doing it until they told him, oh, well, you're going to be pre Kirk and Spock, which he jumped on that opportunity because instead of having to follow in the footsteps of all these other captains, he now gets to be the first, right? The first captain of the Enterprise, which is really awesome. So yeah, I'm looking forward to jumping into this and discussing this. We got a lot to talk about, and it'll be interesting. Like you mentioned previously, once we get to the very end and we've done all the pilots, to kind of go back and look at how we rack and stack them and which ones we think are our favorites and so forth.
Yeah. This pilot comes out post after, I believe, Star Trek First Contact. We see
Yeah.
in
Yep.
like in the pilot, we see a cool speech by Dr. Cochrane, which was pretty neat to have, and then to connect this series with, the movie First Contact. I thought that was a good move on them. And so this was written by Rick Berman and I want to say Braga.
Oh yeah, Brandon Braga.
Yeah, I think they wrote this. Um, I mean, we start off right out like in this nice flashback with a young boy who we later learn is Archer, and the young boy is with his father, who we later learn is the designer of the Warp 5 engine, which was great. Uh, uh, but the aesthetic like of this was even great too, because like even in the first few minutes of the pilot, um, you get a look and feel of what Starfleet looks like. It's definitely a connection. You can feel this modern connection to how we are now, um, and and then trace it back to Starfleet. Their uniforms are very much similar to modern like service and military uniforms throughout the world right now, which was pretty cool to see.
Yeah, they have like almost like flight suits with
Yeah.
extra zippers, right, on
Mm-hmm.
them, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so this episode was also directed by oh, what was his name? I just had it in my head. Conway.
Conway. Did he direct any before?
He has, yep. Um, I can't remember the specific episodes he had directed. James Conway, that was his name. James Conway. He I believe directed a number of Star Trek episodes up to this point. And so this episode, so you are correct. I think they must have started. Well, maybe they didn't start production 2000. This episode came out on the 26th of September 2001.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I want to say there was a year or two in between this episode airing and then the end of Voyager. Voyager, I want to say, ended in either 99 or 2000.
Okay.
And then this episode starts in 2001. So uh, this has been mentioned many times before. Dominic and Connor have mentioned this before. They've been at tons of conventions, so we're not really breaking any ground by sharing this. But the thing that they believe, and many believe, as to why Enterprise only got 4 seasons is because of franchise fatigue and the fact that at the time they came out, they were supposed to be the flagship series of this UPN, which I believe
Right.
Voyager was on too.
Right.
Um, and they go on to this new television station, UPN, which was, I believe, owned by Paramount and or CBS, and it just didn't fare well um on that channel for whatever reason. And
Yeah.
then on top of that, like the ratings were pretty good in the sense of people watching, but not good enough for CBS, Paramount, or whatever, Viacom, all these people and these studios and stuff involved. And the problem was that was at the time of DVR, right? When DVR first started coming out, people could record series and
Yeah.
watch them later and so forth, which was novel back then. Um, The studio, I guess, from what the story goes, did not count those recorded episodes towards viewership. So they were only counting the people who were viewing it as it was actually airing, which was, I think, a huge mistake. And so that affected everything. But I know we're not getting into the series as a whole. I know we've talked about the series as a whole, but that just kind of sets the stage going into this pilot and kind of where Enterprise got started and where we know it ends up.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Broken Bow. Broken Bow. I'm just thinking about the name and the title of the episode Broken Bow. I know that it connects
Yeah.
to the actual location in Oklahoma, like which is cool. I'd been thinking about the
Yeah.
title, but hadn't, gone more than gone more than yep, it connects to the location in Oklahoma. That's as far as I thought about the title on this
Hey,
one. Yeah.
that's about as far as I usually get. So it's all good. We're right there. So yeah, so let's jump into this, Chris. I know you had mentioned that this episode starts out obviously differently. We look at DS9 and Voyager. Both of them started out with that like the
Mhm.
classic 1990s sci-fi Trek scrolling text that gives us some information as we jump into those new series. This one starts out much differently though.
Yeah, it starts off straight into a flashback, and it just like a normal family flashback of a young boy working on his model ship, um, with his father. It's nice, and then it goes into a farm, and then with that farm, we're treated to some kind of chase that's occurring. You've got some aliens that are running, and then you've got the familiar Klingon that is being chased by those like aliens. And he goes into this silo of I think corn, because I think it was a corn farm, and he's able to move in there, and they're chasing him. He gets those aliens into a trap, shoots the silo, the whole thing blows up, and so the Klingon actually like did a very very smart play and was able to defeat those aliens, and yet is later like shot by the farm man, by the farmer with his plasma rifle. So,
Yeah. Yeah, right.
and
This is a very
that's how we
interesting
open.
start to an episode. Yeah. It's a very interesting start. So the flashback, right? We're looking at approximately 2121, which is interesting because if you think about it, that's less than 100 years from now. This is 2025, the time we're recording this, right? And that's like 96 or so years from now. It doesn't seem like that far away. Now, neither of us are going to be alive in 96 years, most likely, unless we've somehow figured out a way to live forever, which I'm going to err on the side of conservative here and say that's probably not going to happen. Um, but so it's not that far in the future from the time we see the flashback. And then did you have this thought when you were watching this again? Seeing a Klingon run from another species isn't that normal. Like I don't remember too many scenes where you see Klingons running away from the enemy versus running to the enemy.
Hmm. Yeah, you're right. It's typically they don't do that. Now, he was, to the Klingons' credit, he was setting up those aliens, those Suliban, who we later learned in the episode are Suliban. He was setting them up in a trap so that he could blow them up, which he did pretty effectively. So he was pretty smart Klingon right there.
That's true. Maybe that was the whole purpose of it. I was watching the Decon Chamber, which is the new show that Dominic and Connor do together.
Hmm.
Amazing show. You can find it on YouTube and I think it's on the podcast platforms, but I know you can find it on YouTube. They have different interviews with guests and so forth. Well, they did a watch party, and it was of Broken Bow,
Oh,
which is
okay.
very ironic.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. They told some great stories. A couple things I'd never heard. One of the things I'd never heard was they mentioned that in the beginning there with the Klingon running around, that cornfield is in California. They grew that corn in that field and built that water tower or corn feed tower or whatever specifically for this episode. So they had, I guess, like a farmer or somebody come in and grow this cornfield to make it for the filming of this episode.
Oh, that's cool. Well, hopefully
Yeah,
they
and
put the corn to good use. Maybe the crew got to eat some of the corn.
yeah. Well, Connor also mentioned that it was like the third most expensive pilot that had been made. I don't know if that was Star Trek pilots or not, but you could tell that they put a good investment into getting this series off on the right foot.
Yeah, you can. Um, and uh, and I'm gonna skip around a little bit because yeah, you can totally tell because you made me think about like a lot of things just aesthetically. Um, like when they went to Rigel, they had these really awesome like away team jackets and away team
Yep.
suits that was just like incredible. They had the phase pistols just looked really really cool. Like to have the sets um of the NX-01 Enterprise looked like fantastic, and then just their flight suits, their normal uniforms that they had like looked great, and the yeah they were coming into CGI, but the CGI I think looked really nice too, and so the design, all of the aesthetics, all of the design work that went into this pilot and the production design um, was terrific, really really good.
And yeah, so speaking of that production design and the CGI and everything, do you feel like even watching it yesterday and today as we prepared for this episode, do you feel like all that still holds up even now, like, 20, 24 years later?
To me, and I think this is very much personal preference, to me it really does, um, because Star Trek and the Broken Bow pilot is very much focused on the story. So everything that's going is complementary to the story. So when they go on Rigel, um, you know, you have you have a scene. There's a lot of effects like uh, prosthetics and makeups in the scene, but you have the scene I think where Mayweather and um and D's character. Oh, the
Whose character?
um the gunnery, the weapons officer.
Malcolm Reed?
Yeah, thank you. Oh my God. Yes,
You
yes.
said we're
No,
getting younger, Chris.
yeah,
We should be
we are
remembering
getting
things better.
I'm tired because of the storm that was here and it was really loud all night, so we did not get much sleep. I'll use that.
Uh,
I'm using that as the reason.
well, all right, let's go with that this
Yeah.
time.
So
Next time you got to
Yeah,
find something
I
different.
know. Yeah, Malcolm and Mayweather, right there. They're in this club, and there's a lot of prosthetics. There's female dancers in the club, um, but that whole setting is to kind of complement, give this insight into like how Malcolm is, his personality, and Mayweather's personality. So all of that kind of fits together. A lot of like set design that went into the um, Rigel planet, which was awesome.
Yes, I agree. The what I love about the design of the NX-01, and I know Doug Drexler was a huge part of that.
Hmm.
Uh, and what I love about the design of the bridge and the way the computers looked and the corridors and everything, it's very believable that the NX-01 is much closer to our time period,
Yeah.
right? If you look at the Enterprise D and everything forward, I mean, obviously the TOS Enterprise looks 1960s. Um, but those look way futuristic, right? Like way in the future, not even close to us. One of the things that I have loved about Enterprise is that it does feel like it's the first Star Trek series I feel like you can almost reach out and touch it because it feels that close to us in our current time period
Mm. Yeah.
than the other series did. Um, and also, if you look at the way in which the Enterprise NX-01 is designed versus the TOS Enterprise, you can, in your mind, believe that, okay, yeah, I could see this Enterprise coming before the TOS Enterprise. I know, remember Doug Drexler, when he's been on with us a couple times, had mentioned that by the time they got to the Constitution class ships with the TOS Enterprise, that things were very slimmed down. They were sleek, very simplistic. The technology was so impressive that they didn't need this overabundance of X, Y, and Z. So I think you can believe that the NX-01 Enterprise fits in the time period in which it falls.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So special effects for me. yes, everything still holds up even all of these years later. But it
Yeah.
is personal preference. You know, I can see other people that really like the special effects and the production design that is within the newer series like Discovery, um, and Strange New Worlds, but uh, it's also like just so much like it pops like so much on screen more so than you go into watching Enterprise. So there's quite a bit of difference.
Yeah. And as we have noticed, there may not be any carpet on the NX-01 or very little of it,
Mhm.
and there's no shiny floors.
Yeah.
There's no high gloss floors.
Yeah.
So
So
it
you're not
isn't
going
it nice
blinded.
to have, yeah, isn't it nice not to be blinded by that?
Functional. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. It's good. Yeah, but I mean, we meet the characters pretty quickly. We meet Hoshi, um, we meet Trip, and I think you get some personal sense of how like Trip is. Pretty funny with Trip and the Captain Archer, like in their orbital pod going up and taking a look at the Enterprise, and Trip hits the Enterprise in that.
Yeah.
Then later on in the episode, when they're going to that Suliban kind of the base, like they're trying to stealthily approach, and Trip hits the Suliban base like too, and gives a look to Captain Archer. So I thought that was pretty funny. That was cute.
You know, he's an engineer, he's not a pilot,
That's
right?
right.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, he can pilot, but he's not as good as Archer.
Yeah.
Now, another thing that's fascinating about Archer, and I'm trying to think back on the other captains prior to him, as far as like, series premieres, not in the order of the timeline.
Yeah.
Archer is a test pilot, which
Yeah.
is a big deal, right? He's a test pilot. So naturally, it kind of makes sense that he would captain the Warp 5 ship. Obviously, his dad, designing and helping to create the Warp 5 engine certainly helps. But the fact that he's a test pilot as the captain and he has that experience in his background is really important to take out a ship on its maiden voyage, especially in this time period where they are now really attempting to flush out and try out this brand new set of engines because they've had warp technology obviously for, at this point I guess it would be 80 plus years or so,
Mm-hmm.
70, 80 years. um and so this is a big deal to take this complex of a ship and complex of an engine out, and your captain is a test pilot.
Yeah. And this everything in this pilot, it feels it is very personal for Captain Archer, right? So
Yeah.
his father was the designer of the engine. Um, when he's actually giving the command to leave space dock, you see him like flashing back to that time with his father, and he's flying the ship. He's a test pilot. He's he's grown up in this circumstance where he's observed the Vulcans, wanting to hold back like humanity from going out. So this is very personal for him. Like he wants to go, and he's obviously a great test pilot and he's a great officer. But he's like he feels this is time. We need to go, and no better time than now. And I love
Yeah,
how
that's
that's
true.
that. Yeah, they set this up really well. Yeah.
They really did. The scene in which the Klingon is in the med bay, right, on
Mm-hmm.
Earth, and you have the some of the Starfleet admirals there, one of them being Admiral Forrest, and Archer is called to there. And I love that interaction with him and the Vulcans. And there's one moment where T'Pol says something about human emotions or whatever, and not being able to control them, something along those lines. And he says, "Believe me, I'm doing everything I can to keep myself from knocking you on your ass." Like that was
Yeah.
hysterical. I'd forgotten about that particular line, and it was perfect because if you think about it, this period of time, obviously, when the show airs, nobody knows really anything about the period of time from that first contact moment we see in the movie First Contact with Ephraim Cochrane leading up to Kirk and Spock. So all that period of time in between. Now they're making a series about some of that period of time in between. And what we don't know, and we learn throughout the series, and we start by learning it in this pilot episode, is just how smug and just how much of a uh, uh, headbutting goes on between the Vulcans and the humans, and how the Vulcans continue to withhold things from them. They're treating them kind of like children, like they're not ready. And we see that come to head in this particular scene.
We sure do. This is I feel like this is the most smug we have ever seen the Vulcans ever in anything previous. This is maybe the most condescending, like they are
Yeah.
to humanity.
It's certainly, if you were watching this for the very first time and you knew nothing about Enterprise and you'd watch other Star Trek, you would watch this and go, wow, this era of Vulcans these are not the Vulcans I know from the other series, because we don't see that same amount right now. Obviously, it's hundreds of years in the future from in the other series, so it's a little bit different. But you're right. I think you are spot on there with the way in which the Vulcans act in this. I don't remember any other time the Vulcans acting like this. I mean, there's a little bit of animosity. Edit my
Yeah.
yawn out there. There's a little bit of animosity between Klingons and humans, a little bit here and there, but not to this level. And what I love about this is it's showing the difficulty, it's showing the um, issues that the humans have to overcome in order to begin making this journey. And the Vulcans are kind of a bump in the road to try to get over that. What I do love too in this scene is that the way in which Admiral Forrest comes to Archer's defense. We know throughout the series, him and Archer become pretty close, even though he's a superior officer. But Forrest goes to bat for him in the very first episode in this pilot.
Yeah.
And I love what he says to Archer. He says, "Don't screw this up."
No pressure.
No,
No pressure.
none whatsoever. I mean, think about it, right, Chris? This particular moment for humanity, building this vessel that can go so much faster than the normal warp engines, is maybe not as significant as Neil Armstrong, but it would certainly be up there as one of the most defining moments in humanity.
Yeah, and this ship, they made a point of saying it's like they could go from Earth to Pluto. I want to say maybe 6 hours.
I think it was Earth to Neptune, Earth to
Neptune.
Neptune, and Earth to Neptune and back in like 6 minutes.
6 minutes.
Yeah, if they're going close to warp 5, I mean that's insane.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Let's see. Other characters that come in. Phlox is great to have as the doctor. So we got the great like initial meeting with him because he's treating the Klingon, and you get a little bit of a taste of Phlox's personality. And Archer like saying, "Well, is he dead?" And he's like, "Well, no, he's not dead, but he could die. He could make it fine too." So
Yeah.
I thought that was great.
This is the first Star Trek series, I believe, where we have an alien as the head doctor on the ship.
Yeah.
Well, or station, I
think
guess, in
so,
DS9's
yeah.
case. But yeah, the chief medical officer is an alien. It's not a human.
That's right. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love Phlox. I'm a big fan of the Phlox character. I think he brings a lot to the cast. John Billingsley was absolutely fantastic in this role. A brand new species that we had never met before. Denobulans I don't believe were in any other Star Trek series that I'm aware of. And he's part of this, science medical exchange program, and is there working on Earth. And he brings a very unique perspective to the series. All the different creatures in the medical bay where they have, or he's using different things to, heal and so forth. And yeah, it's cool to see a new species, one that I think is really interesting as well, become a main character and the chief medical officer at that on board a starship.
Yeah, that's excellent. something I just thought of about Mayweather. Like they Mayweather has like an affectionate like name for him. I mean, he grew up on space transports. Um, and I can't remember if he was born on a transport or not, but they explore that later on in the show.
Yep.
I'm trying to remember what they call him, but
I believe it was Boomer,
Boomer. Yeah, thank you.
right? Because they're called boomers for people who live their lives on those transport vessels where they're traveling years and years to get to places. And yeah, I
Yeah,
believe it was. I believe they were called boomers. Yeah.
that's right. And you know what that reminded me of? This actually reminded me of The Expanse. Um,
Oh yeah.
yeah, because you get those transports that go down and back, and I'm like, oh yeah, he would have been on that transport ship, and he would have had a family like on that ship, and it would be like going for like a long, long time. Um,
He makes a comment
yeah,
too in this episode. I think it's when he's with Trip and they're up in that particular that sweet spot in the ship where the gravity is
yeah,
a certain way, right? And he mentions to him that he had traveled to these other planets, and he Trip's like, "Oh, you been there?" And he says, "Yeah, I spent all of fourth, fifth, and most of sixth grade traveling there," because that just goes to show you how quote unquote slow the original warp engines would have been to make those long distance treks, whereas a ship like the Enterprise that can go warp 5 or very close to it would make those trips in months maybe
hmm
versus or weeks versus years and years and years.
yeah. And it was really clever that they put in that concept here, and they put in the concept of a boomer because it becomes its own like subculture, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've got these group of like transporters like that do this, and they live their lives out there doing this as a business, and um Mayweather comes from that. So
Yeah.
that's pretty neat.
And I love it how good of a pilot he is, right? So it's not just Archer, who's this test pilot. He's a great pilot, but
Yeah.
Mayweather is a fantastic pilot in his own right.
Yeah. Yeah, he is. He can pretty much fly anything. I think he does he say that?
He
I think
probably does at some
he says
point in
something
the
like
series.
he could fly the Suliban ship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then we get Archer or not Archer, we get Trip who's flying the thing around and smacking into stuff, and
Yeah.
yeah,
That's his thing. He's gonna smack everything. Yeah.
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 Now, one thing I did want to bring up, Chris, because I didn't want to forget about this. Um, Archer is the first captain that I can remember, other than Picard's lionfish in his ready room. Archer has a pet beagle on board
Yeah.
named Porthos. And I love Porthos. He's so stinking cute. He's funny. He is appalling to T'Pol because of his the dog smell, I guess. And I love that he has Porthos on there. And I know we kind of briefly mentioned this when we talked with the Where's Beverly podcast. Cisco has Jake, which made him more relatable to me because he's a father and I'm a father. And you have Archer, who's got a pet dog on board, and that makes him a little bit more relatable, I feel like, because it seems like in the future with the other Star Trek series, there's never there's any dogs. I mean, I know Janeway has the dogs back on Earth, but you really don't ever see dogs or cats or, well, that's not true. Spot, I guess. Um, but you don't really see a lot of cats and dogs in the future. And
Mhm.
so in this series, now you get a dog who is a recurring character on the show. I just love it.
Yeah. Porthos is pretty cool. We may have talked about this before. There was no mirror universe version of Porthos, was there? I think we
I don't
talked
think
about
there
this
was.
before.
No, no. In
Yes.
fact, I'm thinking if there was, not that they would have ever done this, but if there was, like Archer would have eaten him or something like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because Archer is pretty ruthless in the mirror universe.
Yeah. Yeah. Mirror. Yeah. Or mirror universe of
Mirror
Porthos would have been like this very like vicious beagle. You know.
or maybe he would have been a much bigger breed and been very vicious and like a spike collar or something wild on, you
Hmm.
know.
Definitely, he would have a
Um,
spike collar.
yeah, I don't want to use any specific breed because I don't like breed stereotypes. They say, oh, pit
Mhm.
bull or Rottweiler. Like
Yeah.
to me, I'm very much against breed stereotyping because dogs are very much a product of their environment and how they're raised. But you could just imagine some type of ferocious, dog, fill in the blanket, whatever you prefer. But
Be cool. He'd be like
Or
this
maybe it would have been
elite
funnier if it had been a beagle and been ferocious.
it might have been this elite guard dog beagle.
Yeah, so I just wanted to mention Porthos before I forgot about it because he's such an integral part of the crew. He's so much so that there's an entire episode of Enterprise, I believe it's season one, called A Night in Sickbay, I believe, where
Mhm.
Porthos catches something from going to the planet surface on an away mission with Captain
Yeah.
Archer, right? And
Yeah.
he's super sick, and Archer's, they're worried he's gonna die. And so I think Phlox does some stuff with some other species of this creatures he has in the medical bay and help save Porthos's life. But that's a very uh hard episode to watch, especially if you're a pet owner, a dog owner thinking about, your pet laying there in critical condition. And but I'm pretty sure the episode's called A Night in Sick Bay. So he even gets his
Ah,
own episode that's focused around him. That's how important he is.
that's right. Porthos is an important boy. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this entire pilot is kind of the concept of it is centered around they've got to get this Klingon, they've got to get him back to Kronos because so he was injured on Earth. So now let's get him back. The Vulcans, think that it's foolish mission, of course, because humans don't know what we're doing. But that's the whole premise. So that is the journey. That's the Enterprise journey to Kronos. But along the way, um, we get ambushed, pretty much ambushed, um, by this first. I think this is the first time we've ever seen them that I'm aware
Yes.
of
Yep.
the Suluban that kind of
Yeah.
keep up in a stealth ship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I had forgotten this fact about this episode. I mean, obviously, I remember the Klingon and them trying to take him back to Kronos, but I had forgotten there was a line that I believe it was Ambassador Saval who says that the Klingons either they wanted them, I think they had wanted them to pull the plug on, quote unquote, pull the plug on the
Yeah.
Klingon that was injured
Yeah.
because, it's honorable to die in battle, not to die in a medical bay and so forth. And Archer is just like, no, we can't do that. That's not right. We need to help him and get him back to his people and so forth. And that's when the whole foolish errand or foolish journey that they believe that the humans are on. That's an important piece, I think, moving forward in this series because it goes to show that every time the humans want to do something a certain way, the Vulcans seem to always feel like it's foolish and it's not logical. And I think even Archer is like, wouldn't you guys want to do this? Like, this is the logical thing to do, isn't it? It's very interesting. Also, the speech that they play from Zephyr Cochrane right there before the ship launches that I think was really impactful. When he says, "On this site, a powerful engine we built, an engine that will someday help us travel 100 times faster than we can today. Imagine it, thousands of inhabited planets at our fingertips, and we'll be able to explore those strange new worlds and seek out new life and new civilizations. This engine will let us go boldly where no man has gone before." And I thought that speech was so perfect the way they wrote it. And the fact that they had James Cromwell come back and play an older version of himself in that speech and like a dedication type of a thing. That whole little ceremony before the ship is launched was so awesome. And you could absolutely see something like that happening if this were real life.
Yeah. That was that was terrific. This pilot really sets up this feeling to me of the pioneer exploration spirit. Um and and it takes it throughout the series, but the pilot sets it up strongly with the speech from Cochrane, with the opening credits and the theme song, which I really like, and I really like the images of explorers like throughout history and the first exploration ships. So that was great to see. Um, to your point on Saval's thinking, like, hey, it's really foolish to take the Klingon back, and you should just like let the Klingon die because that's what they really, they dream of dying in battle, and that's their thing. This does set up like um a theme that comes back into Enterprise, I think, quite often. Um, and this pilot is very, to me, it feels it's very action oriented, very very story oriented, and not as not as maybe Star Trek cerebral as some of the other episodes, but when Saval says, "Hey, um, the Klingons, you should know, like you're not doing the right thing because they should die," and Archer goes, "Well, no, what do you mean? We just can't let the man like die." And that is an important point that comes up
Yeah.
because you see, like there's some occurrences on Rigel where you see Trip and to Paul, and Trip is observing the mom trying to wean like her child off of um I guess methane, wean it off of
Yeah.
like methane, like air, methane gas. But Trip kind of jumps to the conclusion of like that the mom is doing a bad thing, and that's what um Paul points out. She says, you guys always like jump to conclusion, projecting your own kind of ethical beliefs on what you think other civilizations should be doing. And so I think, oh yeah, that comes up a, a fair bit in Enterprise, and is a good thing to kind of think through, like as they go, because that happens, right? They come to a conclusion, and then later they realize, oh yeah, like I guess we were wrong, and they've got to go back.
Yeah.
They've got to go back and they got to fix things, but they do end up fixing things, and they do learn their um learn their lesson, or learn what needs to be learned. But in Enterprise, that's kind of a theme that comes up like now and then in the episodes.
And it's you made a great point when you bring up that scene with T'Pol and Trip and the way Trip reacts, because not only does that come up throughout Enterprise, that comes out up throughout the other Star Trek series as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? The Federation and Starfleet officers projecting those conclusions into these situations. And how many times did we see Picard or Cisco or Janeway or Kirk taking their human ideals and values and attempting to apply them to another culture?
Yeah.
And so when I went back and watched this episode yesterday, I think it was yesterday, right? Yeah, yesterday. I remember thinking through this, and I'm curious if you think the same way, Chris. This pilot episode to me almost had the feel of like a historical documentary type, like looking back on the beginnings of humanity setting out into deep space, and the way in which they play the like the dedication ceremony before the ship is launched, and kind of the preparations and everything, and it almost kind of feels a little bit like a historical lens is placed on this episode.
Yeah, and it's ceremonial for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, it
Yep.
feels that way. So that's cool. Like, because at the end of the end of the episode is this is the first time that humans and Klingons like interact, as far as we know. That's what we believe. But Captain Archer brings the Klingon officer now that is alive back to Kronos, um and it looks like that Klingon officer has like maps, or he was carrying maps like
Yeah.
in his blood, something like that. So
You
yeah.
would be right, because in this episode, this pilot episode, the humans never heard of Klingons before. They didn't
Hmm.
even really didn't know anything about them. So this is absolutely the first time that we find out that a Klingon has now visited Earth prior to TOS and their interactions. Even though the Klingons in TOS don't look like Klingons like they do for the rest of the series.
Yeah. Yeah,
Series
totally.
is the different Star Trek series.
My favorite part, I think, of this pilot is the time span of where they're on Rigel, the
Mhm.
planet Rigel, and so uh they're apparently looking for someone named Saren, that will be able to give them answers. And we learn later that Saren's like a Suliban. But they go down there. We don't know what's happening. It's pretty much a mystery when they're trying to find this person. Um, there's a battle. They get captured. They've got to fight their way out. But I really liked that. And then they're helping each other. I think Malcolm, and Trip, they're when T'Pol and Archer get pinned down in a firefight, they come out like and they're ready to help. And Archer's very much like in the heart of the firefight. And T'Pol comes out and goes, hey, your ship needs its captain. Your ship needs its captain. And Archer's like, no, let me get back to the ship. That's an order. Like I'll hold them off. I really liked that part. That T'Pol was like that. And that Archer was that he did what he did. He ends up getting shot. T'Pol has to take command of the Enterprise, but that's where it changes the relationship a bit between Archer and T'Pol, because prior to that they were pretty not antagonistic, but close to that. But it changes the relationship where he feels like, oh, I can trust T'Pol. She could have done anything that she wanted to do and just abandon the mission, but she kind of carried on with the mission that we were trying to do.
Yeah. This episode's pretty complex. And it's complex because you have a few different factors at play all at the same time. Obviously, the Klingon shows up on Earth. The humans are hell bent on taking him back to his homeworld himself versus just pulling the plug. They venture out, and they haven't been out for very long before the Suliban board their ship, and they're really creepy. And that scene where all the power goes down and the Suliban are crawling around in the dark. That kind of part of this episode was like, ooh, that's kind of a spooky, like Halloweenish type of
Yeah.
feel there, right? Uh, so they meet the Suliban. The Suliban are crazy, and they're after them. They find out that there is this portion of the Suliban called the Cabal, and they are taking orders from some faction in this temporal Cold War, which is being fought across time. And we learn all of these things are going to factor in throughout the entire series, because not only are the humans going to be dealing with the Suliban and all that comes with that and the temporal Cold War, and what's the guy's name that shows up with Archer? Uh, he acts as a member of the crew, and then you
Mm,
find out he's
yeah.
Daniels, I think's his name, right?
Yeah.
Daniels, was that was yeah.
Think so.
He he shows up several times to and brings Archer through time and finds out how serious this temporal Cold War is. And then they're also dealing with the Zindi and the fact that the Zindi attacks their planet and does significant damage and kills a lot of people on Earth, including Trip's sister. All these things are playing in across the whole series. But in this particular episode, the first episode out the gate, they have a lot that they're dealing with right away from many different angles.
They do. And this first episode is already setting up the long story arc format. That
Yeah.
was the TNG had not done. Deep Space Nine had set up the long stories
Yeah.
format. And this I think takes a little bit from the DS9 strategy of setting up this long story
Yeah. And Voyager
arc.
had some of that, right? There were
Yeah,
some long story arcs with Voyager. I mean, obviously getting home was the overarching one, but yeah, I would agree on that for sure.
yeah. Because this temporal Cold War, we're like, oh, like what is that? That is such a mystery. We don't know what's like happening, but it's obviously like a big thing. Um,
Yeah.
so it's pretty cool finding out like what that's all about.
Yeah. And season 3 of Enterprise, remembering from the watch through that I've been doing, season 3 is a lot of that, like every episode is building off of the previous one, right? Like that
Yeah,
continual story arc. And the majority of season 3 is focused around the Zindi and that whole Zindi war and the spheres and everything else. But they do throw the temporal Cold War stuff in there as well. So you're right on that. This is really building and laying the foundation for what we see throughout the rest of the series.
yeah. Yeah. Sato, Hoshi Sato. We get it definitely a sense of her character in this pilot. And she's pretty much jumpy at everything, which was
Yeah.
funny to see. But her and DePaul don't hit it off well at all at the beginning,
No.
and there's uh some nasty looks like exchanged between them, and some unpleasant exchanges of like words back and forth.
Yeah, to Paul, I think looks at Toshi as weak, right? Someone who is very not, she's not
Yeah,
confident. She's having a hard time doing her job. She's trying to translate and learn these languages on the fly. And to Paul, I don't think just has no patience for Hoshi, unfortunately. Now,
yeah,
obviously, that changes over time. Hoshi's an interesting character, right? I mean, Archer goes to great lengths to get her to come back. She's on leave from Starfleet. She's teaching in Brazil, and she's like, I can't come, blah blah blah. Blah. And then Archer's like, oh yeah, listen to this. And he plays this Klingon chick. What is that? And he's like, it's some a Klingon, and he kind of describes it. And she's so she's so infatuated with that. And he's like, you really want somebody else being the first human to ever speak to these people or whatever? And of course that's like hook, line, and sinker, right?
yeah,
She's a very interesting character, and we learn throughout the series that she is the one that invents the first universal translator,
yeah,
which is, of course, is a huge deal moving forward and is a massive, massive invention for humanity as they go out to explore the galaxy.
yeah, yeah. Um, it's, that's a really positive thing about this pilot, right? Is it
Yeah,
sets up, it connects to those established things that are already in the Star Trek universe. But it makes these connections in the original way, as well as setting up these kind of original scenarios. Totally
yeah.
original with the Suliban. Um, a Denobulan. I don't know if that we had encountered or heard that name before.
No, no, they were brand new to Enterprise.
Brand new to Enterprise. Yeah. So that
Yep.
I liked.
And I loved the scene between Mayweather and um, Malcolm Reed at the transporter because
Mhm.
he's like, yeah, the captain said this was approved for biomatter, and they're being somebody's like, surely you don't mean humans, right, or whatever, and like that whole interaction. Because you think about it, if you're watching Star Trek, and Star Trek from the original series always had the transporter. There was never question about it. I mean, there were transporter accidents once in a while, and you had the red shirts getting beamed into space and things like that. But in general, the transporter was a thing that they just used. And an Enterprise, they're not so sure of it. They're bringing cargo and stuff up to the ship, but they don't trust it. Pretty much throughout most of the series, they don't really like to use a transporter unless they absolutely have to.
Yeah. Yeah. Which makes this whole other dimension in there, or they've got to take the shuttle pod like everywhere to do what they need to do. They can't just rely on this transporter and take it for granted. Um, but
Even though the captain has to use the transporter in this episode to get away from the Suliban as like an emergency escape.
yeah, he does. That is their like emergency to get the captain away from the Suliban as he's being fired at. And he's at the end, he's like, yeah, we beamed you up, sir. And then he's kind of checking his
Yeah.
body for all
There
the
was a really good
molecules.
episode. There was a really good episode, Chris. If you remember the one where the guy who invents the transporter comes on board and
Yeah.
he's supposed to be doing tests, but really you learn that the whole purpose is he's trying to get his son when there was a transporter accident and they're trying to get find his signal, his pattern or whatever, and then rematerialize him. And of course, we know it doesn't work. That's a very tragic and very uh difficult episode to watch, I feel. When I was doing my watch through this most recent watch through of Enterprise, and I got to that episode and I was watching it, and it's before we moved. I remember sitting there going, "My gosh, your heart breaks for him because he's not necessarily he doesn't want to deceive Archer and the crew, but he's going to whatever end he needs to in order to try to bring his son back, no matter how minuscule of a chance there is, and eventually he has to give it up. But it's so heartbreaking. And you see something like that, and you think to yourself, okay, this technology, this transporter technology, which is still semi new in the time of the pilot premiering, you would expect those kind of things to happen. I think if we had that kind of technology develop, I don't think a lot of people would be just jumping on board to go through there and have their atoms or molecules scrambled all over the place.
Yeah. And this was Dr. Daystrom, I think. Was the doctor in there?
Was
Perhaps.
it?
Perhaps it was.
I can't remember his
Unless
name.
uh, yeah, but as we figure that out, I agree. I remember that episode. It is a very unsettling thought, um, that the pattern and the energy can be out there in space, and then perhaps like the consciousness is out there, but you're never able to come back and be in um corporeal form or be back into matter.
Yeah. Oh,
That yeah.
Emery Erickson was the inventor of the
Oh,
transporter.
okay,
Emery
Emery Erickson.
Erickson. Yeah, he was played
Mm,
by Bill Cobbs, who was an incredibly talented actor. He's passed away now, but he was
mm.
a amazing actor. But yeah, Emery Erickson, that was the guy's
Emery
name. I
Erickson,
had to
thank
look
you.
that up because I couldn't remember his name either.
Yeah. Yeah, but that yeah, they had this canvas. Enterprise that had this canvas where they could explore how did all of these technologies come into being that in TOS and in TNG, like everyone just takes for granted now. Right.
Yeah.
So,
Things like photon torpedoes,
mhm.
transporters. They didn't have phaser banks back then. So, right, they had to use what almost looked like little phaser turrets
Yeah.
kind of thing, right? Obviously, warp five engines, all sorts of things. The tractor beam. I don't believe the Enterprise did not have a tractor beam. It had like a grappling
A grappler.
hook or
Yeah.
the grappler. Yeah, I mean now the Vulcans had a tractor beam. Humans did not. And it goes to continue to show you that the Vulcans would withhold technology, withhold information and knowledge from the humans. It's almost like they wanted to see them fail. And at times you think to yourself, why would they want to see them fail so much? Yet they're the ones that made first contact. You know, what happened between the time of which Zephram Cochrane established first contact with the Vulcans, in the movie First Contact? What happened between then Enterprise that caused so much animosity? Like, what, other than the Vulcans being smug and feeling superior and everything, what started that? How did it get from there to where we're at here in the pilot?
Yeah. Um, there's this big like contradiction in how the Vulcans act, right?
Yeah.
They're there to help humanity, but they're also there to help suppress humanity at the same time, from protect humanity, hover around humanity so that humanity is not getting into something that they shouldn't be getting into. But Vulcan as a planet and Vulcan as a species, is interesting to think about because they go through this period where their their emotions and their inhibitions, um, almost destroyed them, like as a species, right? So that they had this
Yeah.
big movement because they're just they had such strong emotions they couldn't control them, pretty much almost destroyed them as a species. So collectively as a species, they had to find logic and had to find ways to control their emotions, um, and then you learn that, well, okay, they did all this, but then the Romulans, that I mean, they were essentially Vulcans. I mean, they went out and left too because to do their own thing. So, like as a species, they have um this past that's like uh, they're they're totally about like trying to protect themselves from becoming what they were in the past, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
so
true. Can we talk about
yeah,
that topic for 1 second?
yeah.
You talked about the Vulcans, and it kind of brought this idea at my mind, and I want to get your thoughts on this. So you mentioned the Vulcans kind of looked at humanity like they were trying to maybe protect them, but it's not coming across that way. They're trying to it hold them back and so forth. As parents, if you're a parent out there and you're watching or listening, you have kids. I kind of think of this in the same way, like as parents, do we sometimes come across too much as Vulcans where we're trying to maybe overprotect our kids too much and not allow them to experience things and do things because, well, yeah, I don't want you to get hurt. Or I want this to happen. And it comes across a certain way to them, like the Vulcans would have to the humans. But in our eyes, we're like, well, no, we don't feel like you're ready yet for whatever X, Y, or Z, right? You're not ready to watch a rated R movie. You're not ready to go out on a sleepover. You're not ready for so forth. And I know sounds a little bit cheesy, but you got me thinking, like, as parents, should we play the part of the Vulcans in this regard? Or should we kind of pull the reins off a little bit and allow them to do certain things without overburdening them and being overprotective versus underprotective? I don't know if any of that makes sense. It's just thoughts were flying in my mind as you mentioned, kind of how the Vulcans might be thinking the way in which they approach humans.
It definitely makes complete sense, and I think it is really true that I think and intentional that there's a comparison between to think of the Vulcans like they think of themselves like as the parents of like humanity, right? And
Yeah.
so somehow the Vulcans believe, well, the Vulcans definitely believe that they're more enlightened
Yeah,
than
for sure.
humanity, right? That they're
Yeah.
more involved, they're more evolved because
Yep.
of the realization of the mistakes that they have made as a species, and they've come to that. So therefore, they're projecting all of their fears for humanity, wanting to do all these mistakes and acting with like in, with compulsive behavior and um totally like a a correct comparison that the Vulcans kind of I think consider themselves as parents of humanity. You know, Archer, I really like the scene where Archer calls out. He says, "T'Pol, come with me," and he brings T'Pol in to have a conversation with T'Pol in private. It says, "Hey, I know what you think of us. You're withholding this information. You know, stop doing this." Um, and it and essentially like calling her out on trying to repress um humanity's desire to just go explore, right? So,
Yeah. I
yeah.
actually I actually like what they did with the Vulcans in this series simply because it adds another layer of complexity and another layer of difficulty for humanity when they're going out and exploring. So it like they want to go out on their own and so forth. And they kind of want to do it themselves, but then you almost have like the overprotective, overbearing parent in the Vulcan who's
Mhm.
constantly like spying on them, watching them. They're tracking their cell phones, they're doing all these
Mhm.
things, and it really irritates humanity. It really irritates the humans who are trying to go out, stretch their legs, prove they can do this on their own to the parent, in this case, the Vulcan. And it creates a level of tension. That's the word I was looking for earlier when we first started talking on this episode. This level of tension between them that I think is important because as the series goes on, you see those tensions begin to break a little bit uh, as they go through different events with the Vulcans, whether it's them catching the Vulcans spying on the
Oh
who are they
yeah,
spying on? They
Andorians.
spied on the Andorians. Yeah, they're spying
Yeah,
on the Andorians. Whether it was uh, Archer following to Paul through the like the Death Valley or whatever on Vulcan
yeah,
that's really hot, looking for the Katra of Sirach, I believe, uh, or the battles and all these different things. That tension really builds such great drama and good episodes in the future.
yeah. Agree. Um, Definitely evolves their relationship, and you get a great like definitely a greater sense of the relationship between Vulcans and humanity. Yeah.
Yeah, and you see that too in the scene where the Enterprise is chasing the Suliban, right? And they go into that big gas giant
Mm-hmm.
and they can't find where they went. The warp trail's kind of pittered off. And Archer is able to get to Paul to pretty much do something on the computer that allows their sensors to detect this broken up warp signature, which the sensors couldn't normally do. She does kind of modification that they know how to do, but they haven't told the humans. And that to me, that moment defines where the relationship with the humans and the Vulcans are at. This idea that the Vulcans, it's almost like they don't want humanity to succeed. Why? Because maybe that would prove that the humans aren't as, I guess, primitive as the
Mm.
Vulcans say they are. Or the Vulcans might be wrong about something. Uh, but it just goes to show that the Vulcans are unwilling to be any type of real help unless they absolutely are forced to. Now,
Mhm.
it's important to note too. Gary Graham, who played Ambassador Saval in this, has passed away a couple within the last couple of years, like a year or two
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever it was. So it's very unfortunate. I really like Saval a lot. He's one of my absolute favorite Vulcans. And I love it because you see where he's at in this pilot to where he gets to later on in the series and how him and Archer really develop a good chemistry and friendship as much as you can with a Vulcan, as well as Admiral Forrest and Ambassador Saval. And I feel like Saval really becomes a champion for humanity, which was very much needed.
Yeah, he definitely becomes an advocate for Archer, an advocate for humanity. So that was a good arc, really good arc that
Yeah.
Savall has to come in um and
And Gary Graham
experience.
was awesome in that character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he played the part right. Like his smugness like makes you like really unhappy with him, which is
He
what
makes you want to punch him in the
yeah,
face.
which is what they were going for.
Yeah. Yeah, he played it absolutely beautifully. And then, of course, you also see, as we mentioned before, the Enterprise's grappler, right, to get one of the attacking cell ships from the Suliban.
Yeah.
And the Suliban are very unique because the Cabal, which is basically this like super group of Suliban, and in fact, Phlox even makes a very important statement when they kill one of the Suliban on the ship when they first invaded. The Suliban have been genetically modified. Their clothing is all special. Their eyes are special. Their skin, everything is about them is very different from a traditional Suliban. And they learn very quickly that these Cabal, this special group of Suliban, have been genetically modified in order to do the things that they are doing. And that adds another layer to this species that we meet. I'm a big fan of the
Mm.
Suliban. I think they're a great species to introduce. You have John Fleck, who's been in a lot of stuff. He plays like the main Suliban throughout Enterprise, and I just think that they're really a really fascinating species. It brings a lot, both from um, a an interest as well as from an enemy or an antagonist perspective
Hmm.
in this particular series.
Yeah. Yeah. Y- it's unclear what their motivations are, and they have a great like aesthetic, and they move, creepily. They can become stealth, or become like invisible, and they have the whole thing with the temporal Cold War, that's happening. Um,
Yeah.
so that was all great to have the Suliban involved with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The scene when they arrive at Kronos,
Hmm.
deliver the Klingon, and then he has the data or whatever in his blood or in his DNA, I guess. Uh and the Klingon chancellor, or we assume he's a chancellor, comes up to Archer with a dagger and says something and then walks away, and Archer's like, I'll take that as a thanks. And he goes, tells Hoshi, what did he say? And she goes, you really don't want it, especially you don't know or whatever. Like
Yeah.
that was really funny. It's very Klingon, right? For them to do something good for them, only for the Klingons to pretty much just poo-poo it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Um,
And it's important too, the way this plays out because the Suliban are intent on creating unrest within the Klingon Empire.
yeah.
You see that happen quite a bit. And the Klingons go through a lot of civil wars. And so to have another one would have been pretty devastating. And so for humanity to save the Klingons from a civil war uh, should not be taken lightly, given what we know of the tensions between the Klingons and the Federation moving forward. It's a big deal.
Is this the only time that we see the Klingons in Enterprise? I'm trying to reflect on.
It's not. Nope,
It's
it's
not
not.
okay.
Because
Oh
there's a
yeah, yeah, yeah,
particular
yeah. That's right.
episode
Yeah, yeah.
when they have that some type of disease, right?
Hmm.
That's fatal, and Phlox goes to help the one of the few times we see a non-Klingon warrior. In this case, I think the Klingon was like a scientist or a doctor or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. That was a good episode with the Klingons there.
And then there's also one where you see a Klingon lawyer, actually played by J.G. Hertzler, who plays Martok in DS9,
Ah,
who's
yeah,
remember, he's the lawyer for Archer. And I
yeah.
can't remember specifically what happens, but Archer does something happens and Archer has to stand trial in front of the Klingons, and guess where he's sent to? Repente.
Oh yeah,
Remember? Yeah.
Repente. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, remember
yeah.
and then they end up rescuing him out of the prison. And in fact, even his lawyer gets sent in there, sentenced there too. And they were going to rescue him, and he's like, "No, I guess he was going to stay behind and help." I don't know, but yeah, there are we see the Klingons a few times, and then they attempt to answer why the Klingons look the way they do in Enterprise versus how they looked in TOS, which I thought was very
That's
fascinating that they would attempt
right.
to do that.
Because that was
Yeah.
part of the disease or
Yes.
the cure, maybe
The
like
cure.
an
Yeah.
after effect of the cure.
Yeah. So we do see Klingons throughout Enterprise, but not as much as we do on some of the other series,
Hmm.
especially with TNG and DS9.
Yeah, that's right. The pilot as a whole, I felt was very well crafted. Um, very tight sequences. It was compelling. The visual effects were great. I think it makes you want to come back and watch more. There's a lot of action in this one, not only
Yeah.
hand to hand action, but ship action. Great visual effects. Um, I thought it set up the series really well.
Yeah. You're right about the action for sure. I also loved the feeling and the message of exploration
Hmm.
and hope and ideals that this episode sets up. This idea that humanity has a what's the phrase I'm looking for? They have hope. They have positivity moving out into the galaxy. They're trying to take their ideals. You know, Trip makes a very important not speech, but he makes an important statement when he's having dinner with T'Pol and Archer in the captain's mess, when he says, she's like, it's interesting how you think you're evolved, yet you still eat the flesh
Hmm.
of dead animals or whatever. And he's like, hey, he's like, we wiped out disease, famine, hunger, or well, hunger and famine, the same thing. Poverty, whatever. So in less than 100 years, I say that's a pretty no small feat. But
Hmm.
he's pointing out the fact that humanity's come a long ways in the last basically less than 100 years. If you think about the fact that World War III in the Star Trek timeline happened sometime in the 2050s, 2050s into 2060s or something like that. And now he's talking. Here we are about 100 years or so later, and things have changed significantly on Earth. Humanity has changed significantly. So I love that focus and that idea that humanity is reaching out to the stars with a sense of exploration and hope that what they will find out there will be wonderful. Even though the Vulcans know full well, and the Vulcans are right in this case, the humanity is unaware of what they may run into when they go out. And very
Yeah,
quickly, the first episode they run into that, right? That they run into the Suliban, they were temporal Cold War, Klingons. I mean, it's a harsh reality of what's out there.
yeah. It's the raw ambition.
That's the word, ambition,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, and the aspiration they have. So you, they keep that ambition going up. They as they're exploring or as they're doing their mission, they're running into all of these problems, and to Paul and the Vulcans are saying, you should go back now. It's time to give up, and
Yeah.
it's time to give up. You did fine. It's okay.
Yeah.
Don't worry. It was your first try, and don't worry. You did good. You'll still get a medal. But you're trying to, you, it's trying to suppress that ambition, right?
Yeah.
But this pilot, um more so, yeah, I think this pilot, more than any of the other recent pilots of TNG, Voyager and DS9, sets up that feeling of, yeah, raw ambition and aspiration, and then acknowledgement of like, yeah, we're not perfect. We screwed up like many times, but we're still ambitious and we still want to achieve something. So please don't try and suppress us and either help us or get out of our way.
Yeah.
So um, I like I I like that.
I can't remember if there were some moments in the Enterprise series that this is bringing to my mind, or if it's just kind of my view on this. Do you think that at certain points throughout Enterprise that some of the Vulcans, whether they actually admitted or not, I can't remember, see some of themselves in the from the past in humanity, and this idea that a long time ago they were a certain way, kind of like humans are, and they see themselves in humanity, and that's maybe why they come across the way they do. That's why they try and almost shelter humanity a little bit too much.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, humanity reminds the Vulcans of like who they used to be, and
Yeah.
maybe um those negative traits of humanity, um where when the emotions become overwhelming or the negative emotions have harmful effects, um gives the Vulcans a sense of shame because they go, oh yeah, that was us like not too long ago. um
Yeah.
so yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I like the end of this, the last scene, well, second to last scene, I guess, where they're back on the Enterprise and Archer is, they're getting moving forward, getting the mission to continue forward. Commander Tucker's working on repairing the ship, and then Archer tells Mayweather to set a course for, the nearest
Yeah.
inhabited world, and Mayweather says, "Well, there's an ion storm," and the captain tells me, he's like, "We can't be afraid of the wind, ensign," or whatever he says, and then it orders Enterprise to go at warp 4. I thought that was also important because that shows that Archer is not afraid to deal with adversity, which we saw in this first episode in the pilot. And it shows Archer reminding his crew, like, "Hey, we're gonna do this. We're gonna keep moving forward. We're gonna go. We're not gonna let anything stop us. We're gonna continue on with this mission." And I thought that was wonderful. And then, of course, the final moment where you see a young Archer, flying his model ship with his dad
Mhm.
across the morning sky was very touching. So it starts with a young Archer and it ends with a young Archer. And that's why it kind of has this little bit of a historical feel to it, this first episode of Enterprise.
Mhm.
I love that they bookend the episode with Archer and his dad. I think that's really not only touching, but I think that tells you the start of this journey.
Yeah. Yeah, that was beautiful. um I agree completely. That was a beautiful way to put it and describe it.
And doesn't it make Archer feel again more human, more relatable? You see him as a young boy with his father, like you do Jake and Benjamin. You see he's got a dog. Like it just makes him feel like he's just another guy. He's not this big overarching, Greek and Roman powerful character from some, fable. He's not a fable type of character. He's a relatable human being that you can go, "Oh yeah, he was a son once. He's got a dog. Like yeah, it just makes you feel like you can relate to him on many levels."
Yeah, it does. They did a good job of setting that up with them, and all of
Yeah.
the characters you can relate to. Maybe not to Paul as much since she's Vulcan, but all of them,
Yeah.
all of them,
Yeah.
you can pretty much relate to very well.
Yeah, Archer's a test pilot. He likes a game called water polo. There's just a lot of things about him where it's like, yeah, you feel like he could be your neighbor, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just I love the way they wrote the character. Scott Bakula was so, I mean, the whole cast in this series is just fantastic. Um and the way that they wrote this series, the way they wrote this pilot makes you, like I said earlier, makes you feel like you could just reach out and touch this series because it just feels that close
Hmm.
to where we're at. Even though we know there, as humanity, we have a lot of work to do to get to that point, right? A lot of work to do. But from a perspective of you could see those things being reality, I think is what makes it, you know, feel so close to where we are.
Yeah. Which day was first contact day again? Do you remember the first contact day?
April 5th, 2063.
That's coming up.
Yeah.
In
Test me
a
on that,
while.
Chris.
Yeah.
Uh, uh
Uh
I
yeah.
want to say it was April. I'm gonna look it up. Star Trek First Contact. April 5th is the day. That is correct. The year I believe was 2063, according to the timeline in Star Trek First Contact. It was April 5th, 2063. So at least I can remember one thing, Chris.
Hey, I couldn't even remember like Malcolm Reed's name. You remember more than
I've
me
I,
today.
man, I have blanked on character names sometimes. I'm like, I knew this. Why can't I remember this? But um yeah, well, overall, Chris, I would say this is a amazing pilot episode. We could talk about where this ranks with the other ones so far, but we have other
Yeah.
ones to cover, and we will do that eventually. But I thoroughly, thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyed this episode. And to be honest with you, watching this, okay, so if you watch TNG's pilot episode, DS9's pilot episode, and Voyager's pilot episode, they
Yeah.
feel like pilot. They feel like pilot episodes. And I hope this makes sense, but Broken Bow doesn't feel like a pilot episode because I feel like if you watch Broken Bow, there's not this massive difference between Broken Bow and then the second episode of the series, where I feel like a lot changes between Encounter at Farpoint in the first episode and the second episode, uh the Emissary in the second episode, Caretaker in the second episode. They change things. I don't feel like there was as big of a gap between the pilot and episode two and Enterprise as some of their series, if that makes any sense at all.
Yes, it does because as I was watching the pilot and seeing some of these scenes, I thought some of the scenes in the pilot had actually taken place in later episodes of the
Oh,
series, right? Because
interesting.
I thought, oh, the the whole transporter thing.
Yeah.
I thought that was like well into later in season one or even season two. But then I saw that and I was, oh, this is all in the pilot here. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, it just feels very well connected to
Yeah.
um to the entirety of the show.
And I've noticed too in pilot episodes across just television series, period, not just Star Trek or sci-fi, but just in general, pilot episodes, you meet characters, and a lot of times they're really different than what they are in the rest of the series.
Hmm. Yeah.
And you see a little bit of that in Star Trek, and you see a little bit of that in TNG, DS9, and Voyager. Enterprise, I felt like the characters, the way they are in the pilot, is very similar to the rest of the series. I mean, they changed throughout the different seasons, but in general, the characters as a whole felt very much the same. I didn't feel like there was some big disparity between the pilot characters and then the characters the rest of the time.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
So that's a testament to Rick Berman and Brandon Braga, and their writing and the way in which they develop and create this series. Because they just knocked it out of the park on this pilot episode. They really did.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah. So we'll compare and contrast at another time. But if you're watching or listening to us, we hope that you have loved this look into Star Trek Enterprise's first episode, Broken Bow. It's amazing. We love it. And it was awesome talking about it. I know we've done a couple of Enterprise deep dives, but there's a lot of other Enterprise episodes we could deep dive to that would be a ton of fun. It's just a great, fun series that is very believable given where we're at in this time versus, the Enterprise timeline.
Yeah, absolutely. Check it out. Go watch some of those episodes again, watch the pilot again, and please let us know like what you think of the pilot in the comments. See if you like it as much as we liked it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
same. And we have, I think, 4 other Enterprise episodes on our YouTube channel and podcast. If you
Yeah.
want to check those out, there's some Halloween episodes. We do a series overview of the entire 4 seasons, talking about some highlights and favorite episodes. A lot of fun there. So be sure to go check that out. And again, find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, YouTube, podcast platforms, some other stuff. And we have some fun things coming up, some fun things planned, some more guests coming. And I think Chris, in a few, maybe the next few weeks, we're probably gonna dive into that Section 31 movie, maybe, and talk about it because,
Mm, yeah.
yeah, the reviews are out and it's not pretty. So,
Mm. You know,
like I,
yeah, yeah. It's it coincidentally this comes at a time where our next pilot episode to watch is Discovery, and then we know the Section 31 is, I think it's connected to the Discovery, I'll say, universe of Star
yeah,
Trek.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. We shall see, my friend. Um,
We shall see. We'll find some time to fit that in and talk about that. And yes, you are absolutely correct, Chris. The next pilot deep dive that we're doing as part of the Spotlight series of the Star Trek pilots is Star Trek Discovery. So for the first time, we will be diving into the Star Trek Discovery series here on the Random Redshirt podcast. How's that make you feel, my friend?
oh my. Oh my.
Do you feel anxious?
I feel anxious about it.
Yeah.
I I oh, I mean, thank goodness we're doing these series of episodes because I probably would not have had another reason to go back and watch the Discovery pilot. Um, but thus this is good up. I mean, this is a good reason for us to go back and watch the pilot.
Yeah.
You and I have not finished Discovery.
Not
Um,
even close.
so this will be something for sure. I wish I could watch it and be completely like unbiased, but I will do my best to be like unbiased when I watch it and see how it goes. I know visually like it's beautiful, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, but I'm
Yeah, me
anxious about
too.
it.
We talked about this earlier on the phone. Uh, Discovery's tough. And for those of you watching or listening, if you love Discovery, it's one of your favorite series, that's great. I mean, you can like in whatever series you want. We of course always give our opinions and our likes and dislikes. That being said, I am anxious because I have not watched the Discovery pilot since it first came out many years ago now. I am nervous because I know it was decent. Visually, like you said, it was stunning. I remember hating the fact that the first officer mutinies in the pilot episode. That to me drove
Mm,
me nuts. I don't think Gene Roddenberry would have ever had that. Not that Gene Roddenberry is like the end all be all for Star Trek. I mean, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise never would have been probably made with him around potentially. Um, but I remember just kind of being like, what the frick did I just watch
mm.
when I watched that pilot, So it's going to be an interesting discussion for sure. Maybe we'll go back and go, hey, actually, this was a lot better than I remember because it's been many years since I've watched it. And we have not watched all of Discovery, you're right. So the Section 31 movie will be interesting as well on how we approach that. The reviews are not good. I'm going to try to go into it with an open mind regardless of what people said. Just like I told you with the Solo movie for Star Wars, it
Yeah.
just got trashed on, and it took me years to finally watch it. Then I did and was like, hey, this is actually pretty good. I don't know what the heck people are talking about. So maybe the Section 31 movie will be the same, but the trailer was not indicative of it being good, but we'll see. I mean, Michelle Yeoh is an amazing actress who just won an Oscar. I'm sure she's good in it, but we'll see. I'm really curious, Chris,
Mm.
not about the special effects or whether it's like Star Trek or not. I'm curious. I want to know about the writing. I want to see the storytelling of this Section 31 movie. Like, did they tell a good story? Is the writing good, or is that just a bunch of garbly-gook? Who knows?
Yeah. The question I'm going to ask when I watch this is, Does it explain why Section 31 exists?
Hmm. I would hope so.
You know, and not just like, not just with just dialogue or a couple lines on saying, "Oh, we exist because of this," but does everything connect in the movie to really show, yeah, this is why Section 31 exists.
Yeah. Well, and we know from Enterprise, which we've been talking about, the Section 31 makes an appearance in here. They recruit Malcolm Reed to be a member of Section 31 and do some things. So we know Section 31 predates the Federation. It is a Starfleet, right? It is part of Starfleet. So we know it goes a long way back, way before they introduce it for the first time as far as the shows appear in order on television in DS9. We know this now goes way back to pre-Federation times before the Federation
Yeah.
charter is signed. So yeah, I think that's a great point you make. What's the origin? How does it come to be? What's the point of it? Like all those types of things, I think are going to be interesting to find out. So we will see. We will bring you our discussion and review of that here in the very near future, as once we figure out our schedule for the next month or so and what we're doing and what we're talking about. But one of the things we will continue on is the Star Trek pilots. I will say, Chris, because we were talking about Discovery on the next Spotlight series episode, you have no one else to blame but yourself.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh,
this was your
indeed,
idea. This
indeed.
Spotlight series was all you, my friend, for
Yeah,
better or for worse, for in sickness and in health. It was all you, which is great because I have absolutely loved looking at each of the pilots like we did the Mirror Universe episodes. It's just been awesome to go back and see how each series started. It's been awesome.
yep. It has been awesome. So, and sometimes, throughout like seeing and experiencing like awesomeness of pilots, you must experience not so awesome things so that you can appreciate things that are awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we looked at TOS and TNG and DS9, then we got the Voyager, and we're like, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it wasn't that awesome. I mean, it wasn't awful, but it wasn't like awesome, compared to what we talked about with the Emissary and Encounter at Farpoint, and then the two pilot episodes for TOS. So
Hmm.
I am looking forward to talking about Discovery for the first time on the podcast, and just kind of diving into that series, the first episode of that series, and maybe we'll go back and go, that actually wasn't as bad as I remember it being. Maybe it'll be better
Yeah.
after all these years later. Who knows? We'll find out, and so will you. Coming soon
That's right.
to a theater near you, or a YouTube stream, podcast stream near you. But anyways, so yes, thanks everybody as always for watching and listening all over the globes and the interwebs. We always appreciate it, and we look forward to bringing you the next Spotlight series episode soon. A Section 31 review soon, and some other fantastic guests coming soon. So take care, and we'll catch you next time right here on the Random Redshirt podcast.